Guia de estilo e instruções para a síntese de fala. Este é o início da mensagem. Comece com energia total e um tom de comando, capturando a atenção imediatamente. I took the night shift because I needed the money, but on my very first week, I learned Dustpine doesn't care about money, or drivers, or even the living. The Crown Vic I drove had a seat that sank like wet paper and a heater that wheezed like it was dying, but none of that scared me. What scared me were the rules. They weren't suggestions, they weren't traditions, they were survival. Rule 1. Never pick up anyone standing at a crossroads after midnight. Rule 2. Never look into the rear-view mirror between 2:13 and 2:27 a.m. Rule 3. Never leave the cab running and empty, not even for a heartbeat. Rule 4. If someone pays with a coin stamped Dustpine fare, refuse, and drive fast. Earl, the old dispatcher, made me repeat these rules until my voice stopped shaking. In Dustpine, you don't ask why the rules exist, you just follow them, because everyone knows what happened to the drivers who didn't. If you're the kind of person who listens to stories on a screen, stick around until the end. If you like slow things that leave a taste in your mouth, subscribe and like, if this finds its way into whatever place it needs to find you. I don't mind the company. I drove cab 7 because it was the only car they gave me that fit my knees, and because the number sounded like a promise. Earl was a man who smelled of grease and old books. He leaned on the chain-link fence of the lot like he owned the night. He handed me a clipboard, a key on a frayed ring, and the folder that changed everything. He said nothing at first, only watched me light the dash and slide the mirror to the place where it showed the back seat and nothing else. The mirror was small, round, cheaper than the car deserved, but it did the job. I kept it clean the way you clean a blade. You don't want rust where you need to see. The first night was the most ordinary kind of wrong. A woman at the diner paid cash and smelled like cigarettes and perfume. She asked for the cemetery. She gave me an address and a name, and when I checked the fare, a story about a son who didn't come home. She had a coin in the pocket of her purse, a coin that looked like all the others, until the light hit it, and the dust in the stamping read back at me, Dustpine fare. I handed it back without thinking, told her I couldn't accept, and she told me not to be foolish. She told me the coin would change things for me, that it would make the lines on my hands run like ink. Refuse and drive, I said, the rules arranging themselves in my mouth like teeth. She laughed, not unkindly, and when she left the cab, she put the coin on the seat. It was there when I turned to look. I drove away. I saw the coin in the rear view, glinting like something alive. I did not look at it between 2:13 and 2:27. I did not look. The mirror showed only the back seat and the empty street behind, breathing black. Nights in Dustpine move in a slow, patient way, like river water around a rock. Each fare rubbed at the surface of the town and revealed nothing useful until it didn't. There were people who behaved like anybody else, kids with hooded jackets, men with hands that shook when they paid, and there were those who moved through the town as if the roads were mapped under their feet rather than above. The man in the black suit learned to arrive at a 10-minute interval around the same time each week. He never hailed me. He waited. When he finally booked cab 7, he did so with a clarity that felt practiced. He stepped into my light with shoes that made no sound and a face that was too clean. He never called his name. He offered me nothing at first but a cigarette and a look that read me like a ledger. He asked about the window in the rear view and about crossroads and about coins. He smiled thinly when I recited the rules. He liked the sound of them. Small towns, he said, his voice dry as paper, are always better at rules. He dropped his hand on the glove box, left fingerprints I couldn't wipe away. He paid with a bill, cash, unremarkable, and when I handed him the change, one of the coins had dust in the engraving as if it had been there since Dustpine itself was formed. He set it on the seat between us, like an offering, and he said, casually, "You could leave, you know." The first time he said it, I told him I couldn't. I had a sister in Ogden who needed rent money, and a note slipped under the door of my last apartment that read like a final warning. I wasn't foolish. I wasn't a hero. I was a man who counted cents and thought about how long my watch battery would last. The man looked at me and nodded, as if I had answered a question he hadn't asked. "Of course," he said, "we all have reasons." On the second night, I picked up a boy who wasn't supposed to be out. He darted across Maine with a backpack and eyes like two small moons. He said his father was gone and that he had to meet someone at the crossroads. I told him to go home. He told me the man at the crossroads would take him farther than the town could. He said it like a promise. He said it like a trade. We had rules. I turned my shoulder to him and recited them out of habit. Don't pick up anyone standing at the crossroads after midnight. Don't look in the rearview mirror between 2:13 and 2:27 a.m. Never leave the cab running and empty, not even for a second. If a passenger pays with a coin stamped Dustpine fare, refuse and drive away. The boy began to cry, quietly, like something inside of him was folding in on itself. He shouldn't have been there. I didn't pick him up, not for the crossroads. I refused and told him to run home. He ran. I watched him go, and when he reached the shoulder of the road, he looked back. There was a light at the crossroads that had not been there before, a single lamp that burned a yellow like the cab's paint. I kept driving. At 2:16 a.m., I felt the hair at the base of my neck stand up so hard it hurt. The mirror showed a smear of road and a headlight that wasn't on my tail. My hands clenched the wheel, and I started to count the seconds, inward like a child. 2:13, 2:14, 2:15. A whisper scraped the glass. Not words, not language, just a rasp that might have been breath. 2:16. I did not look. The window in the rear view remained the back seat, the folded map, the empty coffee cup. 2:17. The heater made a sound like someone dragging a key along copper. 2:18. My mouth tasted like pennies and oil. 2:19. There was a knock on the passenger window. I didn't stop. 2:20. 9. 21. I promised myself I would never let the cab be empty with the engine running. 22. The man in black was on the curb then, the lamp haloing him. He didn't knock. He didn't need to. 23. A child's shadow crossed his shoes, and he tilted his head toward the road. 24. I drove past because I had learned to refuse, and because Dustpine rewards habit with less immediate pain, and because the rules are how you bargain with a town that eats strangers. At dawn, the lot smelled of oil, and the coffee machine at the diner sputtered like someone clearing phlegm. Earl looked at me the way someone who had set a trap watches a mouse. He handed me a paper clipped to the folder. "We don't take on kids," he said. "You did fine." The folder was the sort of thing you see in basements and museums. Brittle newsprint, names underlined in pencil, a photograph that had been folded into thirds and softened at the edges. Headline fragments caught the light. Local missing count reaches. Coin found at. Scribbled notes. Dates. There were scrawled comments in the margins. Earl's handwriting, which was impatient and economizing. Watch the crossroads, and do not accept coins. The last line of a clipping read like a threat and a lullaby at once. It isn't the taking that kills them, it's the wanting. The folder grew teeth as the nights went by. I read it in between fares, in the back room when my hands were shaking too much to drive, in the Crown Vic's passenger seat where the heater flickered like a dying animal. Each clipping fit into a larger picture that refused to form. There were names, people you might have seen at the feed store, signs that said "open" in flaking neon, photographs of a dim road with tire marks. The clippings were blunt. 3 vanished within 2 months. Small town pact suspected? Elderly patron claims he knows my name. Underneath one headline, someone had pasted a Polaroid of a man in a suit who smiled with his mouth closed. The man in the black suit began to follow my routes, not in a way that would be clear to anyone else. He would be at the gas station I'm forced to stop at for the owner, leaning on the pump and reading a paper. He would be walking across the lot at dawn with the smoke of a cigarette hanging from his fingers. He would be in the same booth at the diner with a cup already cooling when I slid into the seat opposite. I leaned forward and set my thumb on the wheel as if it could slow the world. 2:14. The mirror showed the back seat and the empty street, and then, in the middle of the glass, something like a face moving too fast. 2:15. My breath left me like a cough. 2:16. A voice in the speaker of the dispatcher that had always been a neutral thing cracked like paper. A name slid through it, one I recognized from the folder. 2:17. Headlights on the road behaved like insects, darting in unnatural patterns. 2:18. The man in the black suit was there with his hand on the door, and when he pushed it open, he didn't touch the frame. 2:19. Cold. 20. A child's laugh that wasn't a child's laugh. 21. My foot moved on the gas like someone else's memory. 22. The coin in the slot hummed. 23. I wanted to look. 25. I didn't. 26. The cab felt small as an eggshell. 27. When the window closed itself, the town exhaled. The man in the black suit nodded as if we'd come to an understanding. I told myself I had done right. I went home and didn't sleep. The folder grew a new clipping that week. Stranger vanishes in cab. The photograph printed beneath was a grainy silhouette of the Crescent Bridge at dusk. In the margin, Earl had written, underlining his own hand, "See page 5." I read page 5 until my eyes hurt and found only another picture, this one of the crossroads at a slant, a single streetlight burning with a halo. I started to dream in fragments that smelled of metal and boiled coffee. I dreamt of a rear-view mirror that told stories backwards. I dreamt of a coin opening like a mouth. Dreams that used rules as stitches. When the man in the black suit finally sat in my passenger seat and placed a coin on the dash between us, it felt like the last honest thing someone could offer me. He said softly, "You keep thinking it's about refusing." He tapped the coin. "But it's about admitting there's a price to everything." "What do you mean?" I asked, because the night had softened me into questions. He smiled like a man showing you a good watch. "You think the town keeps people for nothing. They part, they leave, they return, but someone must be the one that runs the cab. Someone must be behind the wheel. You think you're choosing to drive, but really you're choosing what kind of driver you'll be. There are worse choices." Earl used to tell me the man had patience like a lever. The longer he pulled, the more likely things would bend the way he wanted. The man described a road that broke out past the silos, a route that dust didn't touch. He told me I could get out at the end of one night if I wanted. He told me I could keep my hands clean. For the first time, his smile didn't reach his eyes. I refused. I told him I wasn't the sort for bargains. I told him I believed in small, honest things. They became a litany, a thing to recite when the highway blurred. Don't pick up anyone standing at the crossroads after midnight. Don't look in the rearview mirror between 2:13 and 2:27 a.m. Never leave the cab running and empty, not even for a second. If a passenger pays with a coin stamped Dustpine fare, refuse and drive away. Saying them didn't make me safe. It made me complicit in a system that I didn't understand. It made me feel cleaner and then dirtier. Repetition becomes a kind of currency. You spend it and hope to be changed less. The man in the black suit escalated. He began to offer me rides where I would not drive. He invited me to meet him at crossroads in the rain. He told me to stop being foolish about pennies. He said sometimes the town rewards compliance with small mercies, a week without an odd passenger, a fuel gauge that read higher than it should. He called them favors. He looked at my hands and saw the fine tremor in my fingers where the cigarettes had cut the calluses. Once, on a night I had been on for 20 hours straight, a family climbed into the cab with a cooler and a child that wouldn't stop singing. They were going where people go when they say they go away for a while. They paid with a handful of coins. One of them had the dust print on it. The father flicked it, laughing like a man who hasn't learned fear yet, and the child sang louder as if the air had been cleared. "Refuse and drive away," I said, and my voice was a blade. The father blinked, then put the coin back in his pocket like a man who had put it there to test me. He told me I was being superstitious, that Dustpine was small and full of stories. He said men like me made money on fear. He handed me a note with an address that kept sliding on his palm, and he looked at the child with a softness that didn't suit the rest of his manner. At the crossroads, we stopped for a second, because the child had to run to the lamplight, or the man in the black suit was there, leaning as he always leaned. The family got out into the night, and the child turned back, touching the rear view with a finger like pressing a bell. "Bye," he said, to nobody I could see. He put a hand on the coin in his father's pocket, and the father laughed and told him to be quiet. 2:13 was a time when the town seemed to breathe in all together. I felt it in the way the pavement changed its voice to gravel, in the way the clouds scrubbed the moon. The rear view held only the small square of back seat and the child's shadow for a sliver. It was a long time to look away from the thing most people can't imagine not seeing. I turned the radio off. I kept my hands on the wheel. 2:13, 2014. The child's laughter fell away like something tossed into a well. 2015. A sound at the trunk like a hand closing. 2016. A shape where there had been empty road. 2017. My stomach emptied. I was watching a life that wasn't mine. 2018. The man in the black suit looked at me and smiled. 2019. The family at the crossroads was no longer a family. The child's silhouette was smaller than before. The father did not turn. The coin in his pocket flicked like a tongue. The lamp pitched sideways. My mouth tasted like copper. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles shone pale. The rear view showed the child's empty laugh. In the morning, the father did not return to the diner. There was a plate at his table, cold with congealed eggs. Earl found a scrap of coat on the fence, a child's mitten caught in the links. The photograph in the folder was updated with a new, clean white space where a face had been. The man in the black suit lit another cigarette and did not offer me anything that day. He smiled very politely. He had taken the air out of a place like you might take the lid off a jar. When you spend enough time driving in a small town that knows the difference between mercy and contract, the edges of your life get thin. I started sleeping with the cab's doors unlocked. I would wake in the passenger seat with the heater gone cold and a coin warm on my chest like a pulse. I told myself I was keeping the engine off because the town was kinder at first light. I told myself I was being cautious. In the folder, someone's handwriting wrote fragmentarily, "He who takes the wheel becomes a part of the road." Earl stopped giving me fold-up shifts as favors. He started leaving the keychain with a different number on it. He would say nothing and watch me like an animal in recovery. One night, he slid a photograph across the counter and said, "They say he asks you what you'll give him." The photograph, no bigger than a coaster, was of a man smiling from within the frame of a cab window, and the man was me. "You asked me what I'd give him?" I said, but my voice was smaller than I wanted. Earl shrugged. "You tell me." I thought about my sister's rent. I thought about the note that had been shoved under my old door like a threat. I imagined for a second a life where the man in the black suit simply led me by a route that had no Dustpine, no crossroads, no ledger of names. I told him I wouldn't answer. I told him I didn't want to bargain with shadows. Earl's reply was a small thing that snapped. "Nobody asks, son," he said. "They tell." Sometimes I think the man in the black suit wanted me for my stubbornness. Sometimes I think he wanted me for my willingness to repeat the rules and then try to live between them. On the night he finally stepped into my cab and closed the door behind him without a sound of hinge or rust, I felt the shape of the town seat itself on my shoulders. He smelled like a hotel room that had been left empty for years. His suit was the color of wet ink. He took off his glove and placed it on the seat with a deliberation that felt like a signature. He didn't ask for the coin. He didn't reach. He simply watched me, and when he finally spoke, it was as if he had been reading a ledger and found my page. "You could leave tonight," he said. I told him I couldn't. He smiled at me, and then, slowly, as if demonstrating mercy, he closed his hand and let something fall into it. It was not a coin. It was a key. It had an old tag on it with a number that didn't match anything on my ring. The metal was warm, as if held to a lamp. "This is a key for a room in the motel by the silos," he said. "One night. You spend a night there, and we say you tried. You go farther if you like." I laughed, a small, brittle sound. "I don't trust you." "Good," he said. "Mistrust is a useful tool. It lengthens the trial." I slept badly that night on the hood of the Crown Vic, the rain making the roof sticky and cold where it pooled. I imagined driving off in the dark and leaving everything behind. I imagined a highway that didn't have Dustpine's rules. But when I woke at 2:10 a.m., my hands were already pushing the dash. The man had not shown up at the motel. He had not needed to. In the mirror, the back seat looked like a place where someone had forgotten a hat. The key lay on the passenger seat like an honest coin. I have a memory that tilts like a warped photograph. Me, crouched in the lot, counting the rules under my breath, with my tongue dry and my fingers raw. Don't pick up anyone standing at the crossroads after midnight. Don't look in the rearview mirror between 2:13 and 2:27 a.m. Never leave the cab running and empty, not even for a second. If a passenger pays with a coin stamped Dustpine fare, refuse and drive away. I repeated them until my teeth hurt. At 2:13, the world narrowed. The man in the black suit walked by like a shadow wearing the clothes of a man. His mouth moved into that patient line it always made. He tapped the key on the dash, and the sound was small and sharp. 2:14, he lifted his hand toward the rear view, and I thought for a frozen second that he would reach into the glass and pull out something that belonged to me. 2:15, my foot lifted like a reflex. 2:16, there was a sound beneath the radio, like a throat clearing. 2:17, I thought of the boy who had run and vanished, and of the family that had let the child touch the rear view. 2:18, my hands were white on the wheel. 2:19, his eyes looked like bottomless cups. 2:20, my heart was a small animal. 2:21, the light at the crossroads flared. 2:22, I didn't look at the mirror. 2:23, the key grew warm in his palm. 2:24, he smiled a little, as if telling a story. 2:25, my breath made the air in front of me small. 2:26, I tasted iron. 2:27. When the window of the rear view closed, it was like a book shutting. The man in the black suit dropped the key into my lap and rose to leave. He stopped at the door and looked at me and said, without hurry, "If you ever need to know what it is you're selling, you will find out. If you want to leave, the key is a kind of map. If you want to stay, the coin will be in your pocket like a promise." He left, and for 3 nights after, I dreamed of keys and coins speaking in each other's voices. The key sat in the glove box and the coin in my pocket. I took one to the folder and laid them on the clippings. The photograph of the man in the suit in the folder seemed to be smiling, as if it had been waiting for me to bring company. The next morning, I found a note on my windshield. "Your name is on page 7. Page 7 had a printed list of names, and nothing else. My name was there, in plain type like a label. Next to it, someone had scrawled a time, 02:27. Under my name, there was a small penciled note, "Remember to lock the doors." Memory is a bad currency in Dustpine because it is taxed by the town. I remember closing the cab and feeling like a man folding into a uniform. I remember the way the glove box warmed when I put the key inside. I remember thinking of the boy and the child and the father and the woman with the coin like they were stitches that might unravel and let something in. Earl's eyes when he looked at me were tired to the point of apology. He didn't say anything about page 7. He didn't say anything about the key. He only slid the folder across the counter and said, "You're keeping it then." I did not answer him. I had the key in my hand, and it felt like a small, patient animal. When I went out to the lot, the coin on my seat was warmer than the day before. I remember the weight of it and the way the air felt like paper between the streetlights. I remember the man in the black suit offering me a cigarette and the match snapping like a small yes. He told me, finally, exactly what I had been avoiding. You keep the rules, he said, and the town keeps you. You think decline grants you passage, but you are already counted. He tapped the list where my name had been, and he said, "Tonight you will understand." I laughed then, too softly, because what else is there to do? He looked at me with a patience that was neither cruel nor kind. He closed the door and sat with his hands folded in his lap, and when the clock leaned towards 2:13, I knew the rules would be no barrier to what Dustpine wanted. 2:13, 2:14. The rear view showed me as I had never wanted to see, small, tired, hopeful. 2:15. The man in the black suit did not move. 2:16. The heater stuttered and went still. 2:17. A distant siren that belonged to another town sang and died. 2:18. The coin in my pocket fiddled like a second heartbeat. 2:19. The man reached out and did not touch the mirror. 20. He said my name, soft, amused. 21. I did not flinch. 22. The world felt like a hinge. 23. The key in the glove box warmed as if some small engine had been started. 24. The man said, "Close your eyes." I did. When I opened them again, the highway had a new number on it. The man was gone. The key was not in the glove box. The coin from my pocket lay on the passenger seat, stamped and dull. The rear view showed an empty back seat and the faint smear of something like breath. The radio hummed. Earl was there at dawn with the folder open. "We thought you might need to see this," he said, and the photograph he slid across the counter was one I'd never seen before. A man behind a wheel, smiling like someone who had always been there. The face was mine, and not mine. A time was noted in the margin, 02:27. When I drove cab 7 that night, the town seemed to fold differently. People looked at me with small recognition, and the man in the black suit watched from the diner window like someone checking the life of a clock. The coin was on my seat. There are endings that you can call endings, and then there are endings that are tide lines. I don't say I understood the rules that night. I only say I learned the ledger's final line. I learned that the town will not always take what you give. Sometimes it will take what you keep. At dawn, the cab idled in the lot, and a coin lay on the seat like a small, patient son. I had the folder between my hands, and a photograph that smiled with a mouth that was mine. Earl read me like a book, and said, "You did as we hoped." I was not sure if he meant praise or damage. In the darkness behind the lot, at the edge of the fields, someone I once would have recognized as a stranger, played the part of a man waiting for a cab. He rose and walked to the fence, and tapped. He tapped 3 times, soft, and looked over his shoulder, as if someone had just whispered his name. When you drive a town for a year, you learn the outline of its hunger. You learn which faces are worn thin, and which are kept for later. You learn how to list the rules into your mouth until they are a second language. And then you learn the hardest thing of all, that repeating rules doesn't mean you are free of them. It means you are able to pass them on. I locked the doors and whispered his name. It was not my name, I whispered. I had been keeping the rules a long time. I had said them until they were polished. They kept me for a while. They saved me from immediate endings. But Dustpine is better at bookkeeping than mercy. The town had room for me now. My reflection in the rear view was two colors, the man I had been and the thing that the town wanted me to be. Marked, steady, vigilant. The coin in the seat warmed in the hollow at my waist. When the man in the black suit offered an exit, he offered it as a possibility. When he offered a place, he offered an occupation. He offered a map and told me which lines to cross. I said no. The town still counted me. It was better that way. It was worse. I did what was required. The cab idled and the heater coughed itself back into life. The man who had been a stranger at the fence climbed into the back seat, and, as my hands searched for the rules, he slid a folded scrap across the seat and let it fall into my palm. "Run," it said. "Don't sleep with the doors closed. He counts names." Never leave the cab running and empty, not even for a second. If a passenger pays with a coin stamped Dustpine fare, refuse and drive away. He nodded, and when he did, I could see how certain the town had made its children. He climbed into cab 7 and closed the door. The engine turned over with a cough and a small, defiant sound. I slid into the passenger seat and watched the mirror like a man watching a life he once had. I locked the doors and whispered his name. The town did what it does. The lot hummed. The rules settled back into their grooves. And as the engine found its rhythm and the cab rolled away from the fence, I felt the strange, quiet thing settle into me. The knowledge that being kept is sometimes the only way to stop being eaten. Outside, the crossroads waited like a palm open and patient. The man in the black suit watched me from the diner window as the cab passed. He tapped the glass. He mouthed something I couldn't hear, and the light fell across his face and made him look for a second like someone trying to be new. The coin on the seat warmed to my touch as if it had always been a heart. I drove into the dark because that is what was left to do. He mouthed the shape of a prayer or a lie, I couldn't tell which. For a moment, the town held its breath between us, as if even the lamp needed the answer to know whether to burn. The coin in my palm grew heavier, and the road narrowed into a single bright obligation. At the crossroads, the figure shifted, just a tilt of shoulders, a small claim against the dark. My hands tightened. The rules began their steady chant in my head, keeping cadence with the hum of the engine. I drove on because to stop was to ask questions I had learned not to ask. I steadied the wheel and listened for the sound that would tell me whether the night would keep its count or add another name to the ledger. The hush between breaths stretched thin as the odometer clicked. The clock on the dash had a small green glow. The minute hand slid toward the 13 I had been counting with my bones. I could hear the faint scrape of a truck 2 streets over, and the distant clink of something someone had dropped in a yard. The engine purred like an animal that knows its place. The driver beside me didn't look at the lamp. He kept his eyes on the road as if ignoring the crossroads would make it less hungry. His fingers were white at the knuckles where they gripped the wheel. He repeated the rules under his breath, not loud enough for me to catch every syllable, but loud enough for the cab to learn the rhythm. Don't pick up anyone. Don't look in the mirror. Never leave the cab empty. Refuse the coin. He said them like a man reciting prayers he didn't yet believe. At 2 minutes to 2:13, the world narrowed to the glass between us. I watched my reflection arrange itself in the rear view. A man who had learned to keep accounts, a man who had clean hands and a folder in his glove box. I pressed my thumb against the rim of the coin and felt heat spread like a lie told well. When the minute surrendered to 13, the mirror did something I had practiced resisting. The face in it loosened, as if the light had given up and folded back into a different shape. The man in the driver's seat blinked, and the blink didn't belong to him anymore. For half a breath, his eyes took on someone else's patience and grief and small, careful cruelty. He swallowed, and the sound crossed to me like a bell from a far dock. "Don't look," he began, and stopped, the syllables trailing off into the road. The name I had whispered at the fence slid out of him, soft and sharp and unquestionably mine, as if he had been waiting for it to fit. The crossroads breathed. The figure standing there did not step forward, did not wave, did not ask. He tilted his head, a small question facing the car. The lamp painted him in the color of old paper and iron. For a second, I thought I saw the face of the man who had once sat where the driver now sat, the face I knew from photographs and gossip, and that single line beneath the smiling cab window. He locked the doors and whispered my name. The driver jerked the wheel slightly, not enough to pull us from our lane, but enough to make the cab hum differently. I felt the shudder through the seat. He tightened his jaw, and his lips formed the rules again, faster now, as if saying them could sew him back to the man he'd been before the coin began warming his palm. At the edge of the crossroads, the figure lifted one hand, palm outward, not in greeting and not in plea. It was the same small, practical sign the town used to mark decisions. I had seen that hand before, the way someone folds their fingers around a ledger page. The driver closed his eyes for a blink that lasted days. "Don't stop," I said aloud before I could measure the thought. The sound surprised me. The words came out not as a command to him, but as a benediction for the car, for the rules, for the thing that kept the town from unraveling entirely. He didn't answer. He kept his foot steady, and the cab rolled past the figure like a thing honoring an old debt. When we passed, the figure did not move to follow. He did not reach for the door or call us back. Instead, he turned his head a fraction and watched us, like someone taking the town's measure. Under the lamp, his mouth made a shape I could not read. The coin in my pocket burned against my thigh. Between 2:13 and 2:27, the air in the cab thickened. The driver breathed in a way that suggested he was listening for something else, some extra current beneath the road's usual hum. His grip loosened, and the folder in the glove box vibrated against the plastic, as if a page inside had decided to leave its place. "What's your name?" he asked, not to me and not to the road, but to the quiet that had settled onto us. The question wasn't curious, it was inventory. My answer, the one I'd kept folded away and hidden in slips of leather and ashtrays, rose like steam. I let it go. It was no longer mine to hold back. I had practiced handing names to other men until the practice had hollowed into ritual. The syllables spilled into the cab and landed in the driver's lap, warm and true. He repeated the name as if reading from the folder. When the sound left his mouth, it came full of surprise, relief, and a little fierce pride, like a child discovering a family relic in an attic. For the first time that night, he smiled, crooked and small and entirely new. The coin leapt from where it had been lying and spun across the seat, banging softly against my knee. It landed face up. Dustpine Fair stamped on it like a seal. I watched it there and felt the ledger breathe. "Do you remember?" he started, and the words were not about routes or fares. They were about what happens when someone takes on keeping. He had already begun to understand what the town asked of a man who learned the rules. "Sometimes you'll be the one who doesn't look," I said. "Sometimes you'll be the one who does." My voice sounded younger than I'd like. "It chooses." He swallowed again, but this time there was acceptance under the gulp. He slid his hand into his jacket and came out with a coin of his own. It shone dully in the half-light. He set it on the dashboard between us like an offering, and the cab smelled for a second of metal and the inside of a watch. "What if I don't want it?" he asked. "You won't get to want," I told him. "You'll get to hold on to the list. You'll get to say the rules until they teach you not to ask why." Outside, the crossroads stood unchanged. The lamp kept burning because lamps do not take sides. The town hummed on. The engine's rhythm found the old cadence, that practical heartbeat I had learned to trust when everything else seemed to be bargaining for its place in the night. He turned the wheel. For a long moment we drove in silence, and the world leaned into it like a thing listening for a verdict. The man in the black suit in the diner rose, buttoning his jacket, his lips moving the shape of something, prayer or planning or a farewell. When we passed the window, he stopped and watched us, and I felt very plainly that we had been observed and weighed and either approved or simply noted. At the edge of the lot, when the cab's light fell across gravel I'd scuffed 100 times, he eased us to a stop. He killed the engine in a way that made me think he had chosen to learn what shutting a life down felt like. The cab's interior smelled of upholstery and the smoke from his cigarette, which he crushed under his shoe as if stamping out the last of an old habit. "You'll have to do it," he said to me, voice small in the hollow of the night. "You'll have to walk the fence and wait. They'll tap, and you'll know whether to call his name or keep your own." I nodded, because there were no better answers. I slid the folder into the glove box and thumbed the top page until its corner fit into my skin. When I moved to open the door, I realized my hands had stopped being quite mine. They were steady but strange, like a pair borrowed on good faith. He got out and closed the door behind him. For a second, he turned to me, and something in his face cracked with an expression I had rarely seen in the men who came to the fence. A kind of frightened gratitude. He lifted his head as if to say goodbye, and then, because the ritual demanded it, he stepped forward. He tapped the cab's side once, twice, a quick morse of leaving. Then he walked away, the light swallowing him until he was just another notch in the lot's shadow. I sat in the driver's seat as if I were recollecting a dream. The coin on the dashboard had cooled. Where it had been warm, there was only the faintest trace of heat, like a name after a voice leaves a room. The folder in the glove box felt heavier than it had any right to be. I killed the light and left the key in the ignition. I took the coin with me when I stepped out and put it in my pocket, as if tucking in a sleeping thing. The lot hummed with the knowledge of the shift. The fence stood where it had always stood. The town's breath rose and fell in its habitual rhythm. A set of 3 taps came from the other side, just as my hand reached the first plank. I paused, the sound landing exactly where the rolls said it should. The man I had seen leave, maybe the man who would learn to look and not look, maybe someone else entirely, had already begun. The transaction had been quieter than any ledger I had kept, but the ink was wet all the same. I waited. The coin warmed against my thigh. When I turned and whispered the name, it landed on the night like a verdict. The answer that came back was not a single voice, but a town's collective small assent, the kind that sounds like a window closing and a door being latched from the inside. I wrote the rules again in the dark, not because they saved anyone, but because they measured what we owed. We keep because someone must keep account. We keep because forgetting is a luxury the place we live cannot afford. I folded the rules back into the pocket of my jacket and felt the seam rub against the callus I had earned by gripping steering wheels. The cab sat at the curb, a small, anonymous machine waiting for its next command. I lit a cigarette I never intended to smoke and watched the ember carve a thin orange scar into the dark. The town kept humming. The crossroads kept waiting, and, for tonight at least, they didn't ask for anything more. I walked back toward the fence, palms full of names, coins, and the quiet truth that being kept sometimes means you can never be the keeper. The lamp at the corner blinked once in agreement, and the road swallowed my footsteps like it had been rehearsing. I tapped the fence 3 times. Waited. Listened.